G'day everyone and welcome back to another video here on the channel, and the AFL season is less than a week away, which is why today I'm going to be predicting the ladder for this year's AFL season, as well as a few awards that are going to happen later in the year. Now if you guys do go on to enjoy this video, it would be much appreciated if you could go down there and like the video, as well as subscribing to the channel if you guys are new. Enough wasting your time, let's get straight into it. We're just going to start off nice and simple. In 18th spot we've got the Richmond Tigers. Unfortunately, the likelihood of seeing back-to-back wooden spooners for the Tigers is quite likely, despite the fact that they were able to pick up a bunch of young guns during the draft period, like #1 draft pick Sam Laylaw and Josh Smiley, who should be an absolute weapon, but I don't even think he took part in any of the match sims or preseason games, so who knows how that play is going to go. They obviously no longer have Dustin Martin now that he's retired. Dion Prestia is guaranteed to miss the first game of the season due to an Achilles tendon issue. Tom Lynch copped a head knock during the match sim, meaning that he will go into the 12-day concussion protocol. But luckily for him, he should be good to play by the time round 1 rolls around. But unfortunately, I just believe that the Tigers are going to have to experience what it's like to be on the bottom for a little bit, and maybe in a few years' time we'll see them escape that bottom 4. Now moving on to 17th, I've got a team dropping a little bit. This might be a bit of a shock, but I've got the Adelaide Crows. Now yes, this prediction could come across as slightly controversial, but over the last few years we've seen this side drop very, very slowly. Obviously in 2023 they finished in 10th, and last year they dropped down to the bottom 4, finishing in 15th. And there's really no evidence that they are going to improve this year. Taylor Walker's obviously on his last legs. Maybe the likes of Sid Draper, Isaac Cumming, Alex Neal-Bullen maybe help them get over the line in a few games here and there. They might finish higher, who knows? They obviously won't have Rory Sloane after he announced his retirement in April of 2024. Although one thing I will say, they've had a very, very dominant pre-season. Obviously they bet Port Adelaide by I believe 44 points in the match sim, and barely getting over the line against the Brisbane Lions in the pre-season match. The practice games typically mean very, very little. So yeah, sure, there may be a few positives going into this season, but I see very, very little success coming from them this year. In 16th place, maintaining their bottom 4 position, is the West Coast Eagles. This is a bit of a strange team. I really think they could go either way this year. In my opinion, I could see them maybe finishing as low as 17th, but also I see a world where maybe they can have a really, really good season and finish as high as 12th. They picked up Bo Allen in the draft period. Don't really know too much about him. Don't know how he'll go this AFL season. Not too sure if he even played in any of the practice games, to be honest. But after seeing how Harley Reid played last year, you'd hope Bo Allen could maybe do a similar sort of thing to him. They traded out Tom Barras, which is a huge out. But in return, they did receive Matthew Owies as well as Liam Baker, who did alright at their previous clubs and hopefully can make a solid impact at the Eagles, but probably not enough to escape that bottom 4. Don't get me wrong, Harley Reid had an alright first season. You can't expect too much from a first-year player, but I feel like he was hyped up a little too much. But you can't blame him. #1 draft pick gets hyped up pretty much every year. He probably was deserving of the rising star. I think it's going to take a few more years for him to adapt to the AFL world, and I simply believe that the Eagles will play very, very similar to their side in 2024. Good to see this next team rising up a little bit. In 15th place, I've got North Melbourne. Now sure, this is a team that I would like to see a little bit of success coming through the next few years. Harry Seasel seems to have been tearing up the track during this year's off-season and could arguably be North Melbourne's best player this year. Despite me having the Kangas moving up this year, I just don't think they're going to have too much success if they maintain being under Clarkson's wing, which is hard for me to say considering coached the Hawthorn Hawks to 4 premierships. So who knows, maybe it's not Clarkson's fault, maybe it's something to do with the actual side themselves. Both the likes of Finn O'Sullivan, Caleb Daniels, Jack Darling and Luke Parker could maybe help them rise up a little bit more this year. We're now moving on to the 14th place, and I've got the Essendon Bombers. In 2024, we saw the Bombers have a very, very good start to the AFL season. Looks like they were on track to finish inside the top 4 and maybe break that streak of them not winning a final. But they slowly went downhill from there, with them finishing outside the 8th by the end of the AFL season. In fact, they finished 11th, and I wouldn't be shocked if they finished even lower this year. One main reason being the fact that they traded away Jake Stringer to the GWS Giants, and he was a very, very good player for them last year, with them kicking 42 goals in total. Although they did pick up a small forward during the draft period, being Isaac Kako, who's been an absolute gun during this preseason games, and he's going to be a very, very exciting player to watch this year. And this could be maybe a slightly big call, but I think he's on track to kick 30 goals in his first AFL season. And a lot of Essendon supporters aren't even too keen on their 10 going into this year, which pretty much says it all. In 13th place, I have the Carlton Blues. Yep, deal with it. Sure, they have Charlie Curnow, Harry Mackay, Paddy Cripps, Jacob Wiedering, absolute guns of the game, but they were a very similar side to Essendon last year, in the sense that they started the first half of the season absolutely amazingly, and then throughout the second second half of the season, they started to slowly drop, and they were this close to missing out on finals, but just snuck in there, finishing 8th, but obviously got eliminated to the Brisbane Lions first game in the final series, which is really persuading me to have them drop this year. Jacob Smith looked like he was going to be a good player for the Blues this year, and he was honestly my pick for the rising star until he tore his ACL. And it gets worse as Mark Pittenet's guaranteed to miss the beginning of the AFL season due to a calf injury, meaning that Tom DeConey is going to have to step up heavily in the ruck this year. Nick Newman and Charlie Kerner have done their knees, and Alex Sincotter's injured his hip. So at this point in time, it's not looking too bright for the Blues this year. In 12th place, I've got the Western Bulldogs. This is another team that's quite hard for me to pick this year. I believe they are likely to drop a few spots this year, and I think their chances of making the finals this year are very slim. Sure, there's big names out there who should be having very good seasons this year. Obviously, the obvious one, Marcus Bonampali, he's always good. Rory Lobb might be on for a big season this year, but then you got players like Jamari Ugle-Hayen. You don't know how many games he's going to play. Cody Waitman's out for 3 months due to a knee injury. Adam Chalor's going to miss the next 8 to 10 weeks. Jason Johannesson, the 2016 Normie's out for the next 8 to 12 weeks. And due to the Liam Jones hamstring injury, he'll be out for the next 8 to 10 weeks as well. So pretty much everyone I just named are very important players for the Bulldogs. I just don't think the Dogs are going to be able to work around it. Next up, in 11th place, I've got the Melbourne Demons. The D's are a team that I'm quite confident in this year. I mean, if Petrarca's ribs weren't acting up again, I'd maybe even argue that they make the 8 this year. Clayton Oliver seems to be back in form after a very average 24 season. Max Gawn, I mean, he's a 7-time All-Australian ruckman. I mean, back in 2021 when the D's won the flag, it looked like they were going to be at the top for a few years, but obviously that was the polar opposite. And after a 14th place finish last year, I think the Demons are finally going to start coming up the ranks again this year. 10th place. Who's it gonna be? It's gonna be the Gold Coast Suns. From memory, the Gold Coast Suns were a very hyped up team during the 2024 preseason, and what a flop that was. They pretty much won every single home game and then struggled to win away. Although they did have some improvement after finishing 15th in 2023. They now have the likes of John Noble, and who's to tell if he's gonna be the difference this year. And Daniel Rioli, who was a very solid player for the Richmond Tigers. I don't have too much evidence on why I believe this, but I think Damien Hardwick has something up his sleeve this year that was different to last year, and I hope to see the Suns play finals in 2026. In 9th place, just missing out on the 8, are the St Kilda Saints. They obviously took part in the 2023 final series, and all looked good for them heading into 2024, but they ended up playing a pretty average season last year. That wasn't until the final 8 or so rounds where they pulled off some crazy upsets. They pulled off a huge upset against the Swans, the Cats, the Carlton Blues, and that then led them on to finish the season in 12th. They picked up Toby Travaglia, who I think could be a decent player for them, as he did have a solid game against the Carlton Blues in the match sim. But the way they ended 2024 gives me a lot of hope for this St Kilda team going into this year. I still think they're a chance at making finals this year, but I think we're going to hold off on that for now. Now moving on to the top 8, every single team that I think is going to make the final series this year, and starting off in 8th place, I've got the Port Adelaide Power. I do unfortunately having them drop a bit. This may come as a bit of a shock for some of you guys, as they did finish 2nd last year. They did play in a qualifying final where they got absolutely thrashed by the Geelong Cats. They then bet Hawthorn the following week, and then in the prelim final they lost to the City Swans, just missing out on the granny. During the off-season they lost Dan Houston, who was arguably their best defender, but they did pick up Joe Richards, and I've actually been saying that I think he could maybe play a bit of a Nick Watson role for the Power. They've had back-to-back top 4 performances in the last 2 years, but just don't show up during finals time. And although I do believe that they have what it takes to make finals this year, I think Ken Ingley needs to change something relatively soon. In 7th place, I've got my Collingwood Magpies. Now, before you guys all call me biased in the comments section, I was going to put this team in the top 4, but I negotiated with myself to drop them down to 7th. Realistically, with the list that we have, we should be on for a very big year this year. If Tom Mitchell and Jordan De Goey have an injury-free year this year, that could be huge. And with them two in the lineup, you'd argue the Pies have one of the best midfields in the competition. Dacos brothers, they're unbeatable. Isaac Quaynor's looking good for this year. Even TJ made a decent impact in the match sims. Charlie West, despite him being a low draft pick, he kicked 2 goals in the match sim. And Dan Houston, Harry Perryman and Tim Membry look like they're going to be the perfect recruits for the Collingwood Magpies this year. Next up in 6th, I have the Sydney Swans. There's not a whole lot to say about this side, to be honest. Their side's still pretty good. They have Isaac Heaney, Errol Goulden, Chad Warner, Brodie Grundy, Joel Amartey. The list just goes on and on and on. They finished first on the ladder by the end of the home and away season last year. But the reason I have them lower this year is because I feel like their confidence levels could have been absolutely shattered after last year's grand final. They've lost 2 grand finals within the last 3 years, and neither of them were close games at all. They should still be making the finals within the next 3 years, but I just think they're slowly going to be dropping down the ranks. In 5th place, I've got the Freo Dockers. I absolutely cannot wait to watch the Fremantle Dockers play footy this year. Honestly, besides my boys, the Collingwood Magpies, I think Fremantle are the side that I'm most excited to watch this year. They now have Shea Bolton, who should make even more of a difference at Fremantle than he was at the Tigers, and that's saying something considering how good of a player he was at the Tigers. Jai Amos could honestly be their leading goal kicker this year, and after a very good 2024, Caleb Serong could be a sneaky shout for the Brownlow in 2025. 2025. And after just missing out on finals last year, I'm tipping the Dockers to finish in 5th by the end of the home and away season. Moving on to the top 4, I've got the Hawthorn Hawks. After their so-called Hawk Bowl last year, I think they could be on for a big year this year, the Hawks, unless all the other clubs have worked out how to beat them, which typically isn't going to be the case. Weddler's a gun, Jai Newcomb's a gun, Culture Deer, Nick Watson look like they could be some up-and-coming talent. Jack Ginnivan and Marby Chol did exactly what the Hawks were hoping for last year. And despite how annoying it is how much success the Hawks have had over the last few years, unfortunately we're just going to have to get used to it because I think the Hawks are going to have a top 4 performance this year. In 3rd place, I have the reigning premiers, the Brisbane Lions. They should be able to back themselves after a very good 24 season. And in the previous 2 years, we've seen what's been called a premiership hangover. We saw the Geelong Cats win the flag in 2022 and then finish 12th the next year. Then the following year, we saw Collingwood Magpies win the flag, and then after that, they finished 9th. They now obviously have the Ashcroft brothers, and who knows, maybe a few more years and they'll be just as good as the Dacos brothers. With no more Joe Danaher, it seems like Eric Hipwood's going to have to step up this year, and maybe even a sneaky Logan Morris. Kai Lohman, after a good final series, could be on for a big year, and Oscar McInerney seems to be recovering well after an injury in last year's prelim final, and I'd be shocked if we didn't see the Lions back in finals this year. In 2nd place, I've got the GWS Giants. It's about time we see these boys make an impact on this league. They've been good for a fair bit now. They've now got Jake Stringo, who kicked 42 goals in 2024, and him alongside Jesse Hogan, they're going to be unbeatable, meaning that players like Toby Green are probably unlikely to get past 2 in the 50 this year, which isn't necessarily a bad thing considering how good these 2 boys are. Unfortunately, Tom Green will miss the beginning of the season due to an injury, and it's only a matter of time before we see this team win that final game in September. And now in 1st place, I believe the minor premiers of 2025 will be the Geelong Cats. I don't know how they do it, but they always just find a way to be a good side. I mean, how do you go from finishing 12th in 2023 to nearly making a grand final in 2024? They recently won a flag in 2022, and it seems like they could be back into that premiership contention side once again. And whenever Bailey Smith plays that first game, it'll be interesting to see how he performs, because obviously he has not played a game in over a year. Although one thing that could be a slight concern for the Geelong Cats is that preseason game they took part in on Tuesday. They had a home game at the Cattery against the Dons and still lost. And Isaac Kako, who hasn't even played an official AFL game, still kicked 4 goals. But considering how good their list is, I think they should do just fine by the time the AFL season rolls around. Well, now that we've got the AFL ladder out of the way, let's get into the season predictions. My first prediction is for the AFL Grand Final matchup, and I'm going to have the Geelong Cats taking on the Freo Dockers. Sure, the Cats have had a rocky preseason start, but take a look at the preseason games between West Coast and Fremantle back in 2018. Fremantle absolutely thrashed the Eagles, yet the Eagles went on to go win the flag that year. I think based on how good Freo and Geelong's midfield are, they're going to have no issue winning it out of the middle all year. And with both teams having really strong forwards and defenders, they're going to be really, really hard to beat this year. But out of those 2 teams, I think the likely AFL premiers of 2025 will be the Geelong Cats. If my predictions are correct, they'll finish on top of the AFL ladder. They now have Bailey Smith, who should do quite well this season, and they still have pretty much half the side that they had back in 2022 when they won their last flag. And after a really good 2024 season, I think they'll be back into premiership contention this year. The Rising Star Award. Now, my original pick for this was Jagger Smith until he tore his ACL. So now we're going to go semi-basic and go Levi Ashcroft. We've seen how good of a footballer Will Ashcroft is, and rumour has it Levi Ashcroft's actually slightly better than his own brother. That's what the media's saying, not me. But if that is true, then of course he's going to win the Rising Star. Son of Marcus Ashcroft, meaning he's got a big name to live up to. And as long as he has an injury and suspension for a year this year, I think he's easily the favourite for the Rising Star. Now moving on to the Coleman Medal, I'm going to chuck out a bit of a different name out there, and I'm going to say Joel Amartey. He kicked a massive amount of 43 goals during the 2024 season, and I believe he'll go on to have an even bigger year this year. Back in round 14 of last year, he managed to kick 9 goals in one singular AFL game, and that performance alone makes me even more excited about what Joel Amartey's got up his sleeve this year, and I can't wait to see him have a 70 to 80 goal performance in 2025. And now the big award. The medal that is awarded to the best player of the 2025 season being the Brownlow Medal, and of course I've got it back in my boy Nick Dacos. Cripps won it last year, Neil won it the year before, but last year Dacos finished in 2nd and the year before he finished in 3rd, meaning that he's jumped up 1 spot progressively over the past 2 years, so maybe he's going to jump that 1 extra spot this year, who knows. I mean, he racked up a total of 37 votes last year and still came 2nd. Yeah, I'm sure Cripps, Bonds, Isaac Heaney even will all be up there in contention for this medal this year. But if Dacos doesn't win the Brownlow this year, you could probably keep predicting him to win it within the next 5 years, and eventually you're going to get it right. And don't get me wrong, Cripps was easily the best player in 2024, but Is he really a player who deserved 45 votes? I think last year was easily the most controversial Brownlow count in possibly history. So despite him being the best player of last year, was his season really worth 45 votes? I'll leave that up to you guys. And just like that, this video has come to an end. And if you guys did enjoy, could you please show me that by liking the video as well as subscribing to the channel if you guys are new. And I hope to see you all in the next video that I post here on the channel.